We heard quite a bit about potential voter fraud from the Republican Party. But when voter fraud does happen, and it is rare, it is interesting to see how the two-tier justice system comes into play and how some people suffer pretty harsh consequences while others just get a little slap on the wrist. So the latest example of America's two-tier justice system has to do with one woman, a black woman from Texas, who is fighting against her 5-year prison sentence after she made a mistake and tried to vote by absentee ballot. She had been convicted of tax fraud earlier, and since she lives in Texas and had been a convicted felon, she's not allowed to vote, something that she didn't know when she submitted an absentee ballot. Now, there's the other case, which involves a white man from Pennsylvania who pleaded guilty to committing voter fraud. In fact, he committed voter fraud in the most brazen way, which was pretending as though a family member of his was still alive in order to cast a ballot on their behalf. So Bruce Bartman is his name, he's a 70-year-old from Pennsylvania, pleaded guilty to perjury and unlawful voting in the 2020 election. He registered his dead mother and cast a vote for her to support Donald Trump. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation for intentionally committing voter fraud. Now, meanwhile, you go to Texas, and let me give you the details of the woman who is facing a 5-year prison sentence as a result of her mistake in voting. Her name is Crystal Mason, and she was on probation following a federal tax fraud conviction when she learned she was not on the state's voter roll. After taking or talking with a poll worker about getting back on the voter roll in 2016, she was advised to cast a provisional ballot, which she did. Her vote was rejected, and she's now facing 5 years in prison for illegal voting. Now, there is a difference between the two, right? On one hand, you have someone who had a prior conviction, and as a result of that prior conviction, because she lives in the state of Texas, she's unable to ever vote again. Whereas in the case of Pennsylvania, you have the Bruce Bartman man who did commit voter fraud, but he didn't have a felony on his record. So he gets slapped with probation.
Yeah. So first of all, let's note that Trump claimed there was millions of cases of voter fraud in the country, millions. I've heard about 2 or 3 cases in the whole country. And so it's not like we weren't looking. Oh my God, the Republicans tried to overturn every stone to try to find any case of voter fraud, and they found 2 or 3. One was a Republican in Pennsylvania, another one, in this case, unintentionally, apparently, did the voter fraud. Okay, by the way, if you're a Republican and you want to say, oh no, you guys aren't being fair, I think she's very mischievous, devilish criminal, and she wanted to violate her probation to vote because that's worth it.
Yeah.
Like that kind of criminal, that evil criminal cares so much about voting that they're gonna risk a 5-year jail sentence. I mean, maybe to rob a bank, right? But to vote, right? Okay, but let's say, okay, fine, you hate her, you got her. One case, okay? Maybe there's 2 or 3 others in the whole country. So your guy's an unbelievable liar. Okay, now, and all of you, 70% of Republicans believe that. You're all in cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, totally nuts. All right, now, in this situation, guys, this is what, I don't love the word, but I've explained it 1,000 times, the phrase, because I want you to understand what it means. This is what white privilege looks like. I don't like the word because it makes poor and middle-class white people think like, I don't live in a mansion and I don't have a yacht. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that when you get arrested for the same crime, actually a worse crime, because in his case, he clearly intended it, right? Mm-hmm. You don't get a jail sentence. And you never see that the system systematically crushes black people in this country. They're like, oh, you did a provisional ballot because you weren't sure, right? And you asked the lady, what should you do? And she told you to give a provisional ballot, and you did as you were told. You're gonna get prison for 5 years. And by the way, there's also the over-policing of African Americans.
Yes.
We've discussed that many times on the show as well. So 12% of the population, 40% of the people who are arrested. Did they do 40% of the crimes in the country? Well, we know for a fact that they didn't, because there's 1,000 examples, but the one that's easiest to understand is marijuana. White people, black people do it at the same rate. Black people are arrested at 4 times the rate. And then if you got arrested for something that white people never get arrested for, and then you voted because you weren't sure, boom, boom, 5-year sentence. Meanwhile, the white guy is going, yeah, I voted for my mom because I wanted to vote for Trump twice because I love Trump. And he told me that the other guys are doing voter fraud, so I did more voter fraud. Oh, you're free to go because you're white, it's okay. Off you go. And by the way, you're right wing, you gotta be right wing. So if you look at all of these thousands of cases where we've shown you the disparity and you still don't see it, it's because you don't want to see it. It makes you uncomfortable. So you think, nah, put the black people away. But you know when they started over policing black people? During is Jim Crow, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so the reason they started during Jim Crow is they wanted to put them back in chains. So they're like, who cares? Of course we're not gonna police ourselves. Go send all the police to the black neighborhoods and arrest as many of them as possible, mostly men, right? But just round them up. And then not only do you get to put them back in chains, but when they get out, we'll pass laws saying, oh, they're dangerous criminals, they're not allowed to vote. Boom, we disenfranchise them. And that's happening still today, and this is one of those cases.
Yeah, I mean, this story is it's the intersection of so many different issues that we have, like the over policing in black communities, specifically how it impacts their ability to take part in our democracy. I mean, clearly she didn't know that she wasn't allowed to vote. She probably thought it was insane. Like the idea of not being able to participate in our democracy after you've done your time. You've already served your time, you're done. So what, now you're never allowed to vote again? Like think about, let that sink in, guys. Think about how crazy that is, especially when you consider the number of non-violent people who have been imprisoned, who have dealt with convictions that are gonna haunt them for the rest of their lives when it comes to finding jobs, and certainly in this case, when it comes to being able to vote. Now look, I don't think either one of them should serve time in prison for this act, right? In this case, I think that she made a mistake. I believe her. Clearly, she's asking questions because she couldn't understand why she wasn't on the voter rolls. This guy intentionally committed voter fraud. He admitted to it and he pleaded guilty. Do I want to throw the book at him and put him in prison for 5 years? No, I don't. But I think that there is a two-tier justice system, and this ends up adding insult to injury to a woman who, I just find it interesting that she had to pay the price for tax fraud. But I would like to think that she's not the kind of person who would owe the government $300 million like Donald Trump does. Someone who clearly committed tax fraud and other forms of fraud in order to obtain loans that he had no business obtaining. But hey, he became the president of the United States while this woman served time in prison for it.
I just want to double down on that. Right before the election, if you remember, we covered the story of there's no question that there's at least $100 million that Donald Trump owes the government, and he hasn't paid in over a decade. And that's why he keeps saying he's under audit, right? And so they were concerned that the government was then going to say, okay, you owe us, you finally have to pay us. Where is it? I hope they eventually do it, but there's some chance they'll be like, oh, he's a powerful, rich, white Republican. That's it. He can steal $100 million from the American people. For me and you, we pay our taxes. Every time you pay your taxes, remember that Donald Trump stole some of those taxes and put it in his pocket, okay? Meanwhile, she's going to prison for 5 years. If you think that there's an equal justice system in this country, both on the issue of whites and blacks, but also on the issue of poor and rich, you're nuts. Every poor person in the country, black or white, knows there's two different justice systems. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, we really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.